The 13th of September 2020 is a day that Eunice Wangari will always carry with her. On this day, what was meant to be a cute and innocent date would change her life forever. That day, Eunice traveled from her home in Karura all the way to the CBD to meet Moses Gatama. It was their first date since the two had only known each other through Facebook. They met in Mr. Gatama's office and went out for lunch. They later returned to the premises for drinks, but this time they opted to settle on the 12th floor where they stayed till around 7 p.m. At this time, Eunice told her date that she wanted to leave for home, but he refused and insisted that she spend the night. An argument ensued and Mr. Gatama threw her from the 12th floor, from which she fell 3 floors to the 9th floor and suffered serious injuries. The matter was then taken to court. The conversation surrounding this incident resurfaced a few months later when it was covered in the news media and became a national conversation. This is where 3 radio personalities, Shaffie Weru, DJ John Falme, and Neville, come in. At the time, the 3 were hosting a morning show on Homeboys Radio known as The Liftoff, and on the morning of March 25th, 2021, they decided to make the case part of their discussion. This is what they had to say.
Anyway, talking about Maisha, guys.
Yes.
We were having a conversation around Eunice, the 20-year-old lady who last year found a date on Facebook, went on a first date, and after that, she couldn't be able to, she became immobile. Yes, she's still limping because apparently this man she found on Facebook invited her to a building in the CBD. They were having a date on the 12th floor. And then guess what happened?
What happened?
The guy tried to make moves like Jaguar.
Netflix and chill.
And then guess kidogo man, she was like, yo, I'm not doing this, I'm not about this. The guy pushed her over
the 12th floor.
Wow. And now she's a cripple.
Damn,
and
that's
I'm
crazy.
calling on all the ladies. This is 2021 with the pandemic and all the problems that we're facing.
What are you telling the ladies,
I'm telling the ladies, you guys need to play hard to get. You need to be unavailable. You cannot be the Chiles who have just been called to go drink gin and then you leave 40 kilometers away. Unatoka Thika.
Wacha hizo.
Unajileta Kileleshwa.
Si tumefea.
Ama unatoka Buru. Unajikuta
unajipata Kitengela. Mountain View.
A place you've never even been.
Shaffie Weru.
See a stranger. Things don't work like that.
Okay.
So, I know you're both dating.
Hey.
The big Q.
Don't give Edgar news this morning. I'm not dating.
My point is this.
Yes. Tuko na kamutu.
What, do you think Kenyan Chiles, whether you are dating or not, are too available? Are they too loose? Are they too willing? Are they too desperate? And that's why they're getting themselves caught up in such situations?
Wow. DJ John Farmer, I'll let you take this one first. Nitakuacha wewe uende wa kwanza. Unasema aje?
There are 2 ways of looking at it. Hapa kuna maboy machizi. We have guys who are crazy.
Yes.
And mimi as a guy, siwezi taku take both sides.
Okay.
So what I will say is,
toa ushuhuda, toa testimony.
Ushuhuda yangu.
Toa testimony.
Bro, kuna wale wako tu available. Kuna wale bro,
You're a DJ, of course. Let's be honest.
So there are 2 ways. Maybe the chick that I'm interested in, manze bro alinzungusha 6 months.
6 months.
And that's what women need to do.
Na bado unamfuata 6 months.
Lakini sasa yule mwenye utaki.
The trio's discussion didn't sit well with a lot of people, and rightfully so. Soon, people caught up with what they said, and then came the outrage across various social media platforms. The cancellation of Kina Shaffie became serious when major sponsors and corporations, such as East African breweries, withdrew advertising support from the radio station, while the Communication Authority of Kenya, CAK, fined the station 1 million shillings for the derogatory comments. The show was suspended for 6 months, and all 3 were fired. Now, I think they deserved it because what they did was clearly wrong. I mean, not only is it unethical to discuss victims of violence in such a manner that implies you're mocking them, but to do this on a national platform. And you also have to take into account the time in which they had this conversation. This was just after the pandemic in 2021 when things were slowly starting to open up. And during the pandemic, there were a lot of domestic violence cases that were reported, as if we are not already dealing with issues of gender-based violence. Even pre-pandemic, it was an issue, but it escalated during the pandemic. You know, when people were locked in their houses and they couldn't go anywhere. So it was insensitive. No matter how you spin it, they deserved what they got because they were wrong. Wrong is wrong and right is right. And in this case, Shaffie and company were wrong. And you know, the silly thing is, if you listen to that audio, DJ John Falme had the opportunity to steer the conversation into a more sensible direction because Shaffie is the one who brought this whole conversation up and tried to make it edgy by mocking the victim. And as for DJ John Falme's opinion, he had the opportunity to steer the conversation into a more sensible direction, but he chose to do what he did. Neville, on the other hand, was just laughing. And you have to wonder, is it so hard for dudes to just hold each other accountable? Is it very hard to just do that? Will you die if you hold your fellow man accountable for what they say or what they do? Anyway, so why is this story relevant? Well, because this was the first time, on a large scale at that we witnessed cancel culture come to life as Kenyans. Also, there have been some recent developments surrounding this incident since it happened, which we'll get into later. With that being said, welcome to the Rawpod with me, Renee Were. Let's get real and raw. So, before we go on, I'd just like to remind you to follow me on all my socials. I'm literally the easiest person to find online. All you have to do is search Renee Were and you will find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And also, don't forget to follow the Rawpod on Instagram at @the_Rawpod. And don't forget to share this episode and also tell me what you think about this episode and any suggestions you may have for topics that you think should be covered here. So, where did cancel culture really come from? According to a 2020 article by Vox, the term got its origins from a Love and Hip Hop New York episode that aired in December of 2014, in which cast member Cisco Rosado tells his love interest Diamond Strawberry during a fight, "You're cancelled." For some reason, Love and Hip Hop is one of those reality shows that I never really just took interest in. I don't know, I find it too ratchet, but anyway, that's not why we're here today. So, basically the chick, Diamond, confronts her boyfriend about some cheating allegations. You know, in these reality shows, they're always cheating and all that. So she's there busy confronting him while they're at a restaurant, and she's, you know, cussing and shouting and all up in his face and blah, 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 blah. So it gets heated and the dude basically goes like, "You're cancelled. Get out of my face. You're cancelled." So yeah, that's basically the scene. And after this episode aired, the quote became viral and popular among Twitter users. From there, the idea of cancelling began to spread via Black Twitter throughout 2015, and it was used as a reaction to someone doing something you disapproved of, either jokingly or seriously. At first, it started off as a way to refer to people you knew or acquaintances, but it later evolved into responding or referring to celebrities, public figures, or entities whose actions offended you. The past 4 to 5 years, with the rise of movements such as the Me Too movement, have seen cancel culture become a vital tool to call out societal wrongs, mostly perpetuated on marginalized groups. The end goal is to mainly obtain social justice for these groups. So, it typically goes like this. A celebrity or a public figure says or does something deemed offensive, or unpleasant details of their pasts are uncovered. Then the outrage begins, with social media as the main platform for this to happen. Tweets and countless social media posts are made calling for the celebrity's career to end, whether it's through boycotting their work, products and services, or disciplinary action from an employer. And it doesn't only affect individuals. brands and companies have also found themselves on the cancel culture chopping block. Like in 2019 when activist Shifa Okore led a Twitter campaign that called for the boycott of prominent sanitary towel brand Always. This was after the activist shared her experience using the brand's products under the hashtag #MyAlwaysExperience, which led to hundreds of women sharing their unpleasant experiences with the brand. So after the offender is outed, it can go in so many different directions. They could choose to ignore and act like nothing happened, deny everything, give a half-baked apology laced with heavy PR, go on an apology tour, or, if they're brave enough, talk shit. In the case of our 3 beloved radio presenters, only Neville was actually brave enough to apologize. As for Shaffie and DJ John Falme, they decided to be arrogant, and then they later issued their typical half-baked apology after heavy public scrutiny. Kenyans finally got what they wanted, and all was well. Or was it? This is where the joke that is Kenyan cancel culture comes in. Now, was the move to fire Shaffie and company a good one? On one hand, yes, because it helped set a precedent that misogynistic actions have consequences. However, what about Eunice? She had to live with the trauma of not only almost dying, but also being victim-shamed and mocked on a national media platform. She's also still undergoing treatment to this day due to the serious injuries she sustained. And you know how much money that costs, given the healthcare situation in our current Kenya. Her life is literally never going to be the same because of that one incident. It's never going to be the same physically for her because I'm sure she has to now move with some sort of help. Mentally, it's never going to be the same. Financially, it's definitely never going to be the same. And the only type of justice that Eunice got is that the perpetrator was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Otherwise, she still has to live with the rest of the scars. If cancel culture is going to work, there should at the very least, be adequate support and compensation for the victims. Another joke that never gets old is how the offenders remain redeemable. What do I mean by this? They still get to go on with life as normal, with most landing high-profile jobs. A great example is our leadership, with the likes of Kina Babu Owino and Didmas Baraza. People who, you know what they did. One caused serious harm to another, and that person is still maimed to this day, and the other one is actually allegedly killed someone. Anyway, away from politics, because I am not going to let politics spoil the mood. The 3 radio personalities still enjoy careers today. In fact, Shaffie Weru landed a managerial job with a company known as Royal Group of Companies just weeks after his homeboy's exit. A few days ago, it was announced that he will now be the head of events and branding at Nairobi County under the administration of Governor Sakaja. Neville is currently a radio presenter at Trace East Africa, while DJ John Falme is still getting gigs. In fact, the other day he was playing at The Trend. You know that show that comes on NTV every Friday with Amina? He was playing there, and coincidentally, that is the day that they had Shaffie Weru as one of the guests on the show. And of course, they still have their loyal fans. Which reminds me of when Sauti Sol abruptly cancelled their Soul Saturday concert in December of 2020. Kenyans ranted and you cried, mlilia, mliwatusi, mkasema kila kitu. You demanded for refunds, but you still bought tickets for the next concert. So you wonder, what was the point? What was the point of all that ranting, and crying, and cussing at Kina Bien? Because I kid you not, the next Soul Saturday, watu walija, kulija. After watu kulia, now tapata, the same people who were never even refunded from the initial concert They were front row, singing word for word, bar for bar. Crying hapa, usiponipenda nitapendwa sijui na nani. Mlikuwa hapo mbele. Sometimes Kenyans, I feel like you enjoy your own suffering. It's like you're into BDSM, but BDSM for struggle. Easy struggles are maisha. It's like you enjoy suffering. Yeah, you like participating in your own suffering. You love it when other people inflict suffering onto you, and you love witnessing other people suffering. Wakenya, at this point, I don't know. You should not be saved because clearly you don't want to be saved. So, with all that, what should be done instead? As I was researching this topic, I came across an article by Pulse Live Kenya that suggested we replace cancel culture with accountability culture. And I agree. The article further suggests that instead of calling out and shaming, we should, and I quote, interrogate frameworks and open dialogue, call for processes, systems, and structures to be accountable for the well-being of others. End of quote. The article by Vox that I referenced earlier also talks about transformational change instead of reactionary change, instead of the usual, ranting and anger and outrage that we typically see on social media. This has to do with giving people the grace and space to grow and change for the better. It's believing that nobody is perfect and people deserve a second chance at, forgiveness. They deserve forgiveness and they deserve a second chance at, for change. These are great steps, but I also think that sometimes force and pressure have to be applied for things to truly change. It can't always be sunshine and rainbows. And most of the rights that we enjoy today were not got through kumbaya and peaceful dialogue and all that. It sounds nice on paper, but in reality, sometimes you really have to fight and fight for you to actually get what you want and for you to get what you deserve. The people calling out the offenders still have to deal with being marginalized, and for some, it's the first time they actually have a voice to do that. Because one thing that I've observed with cancel culture scenarios is that there's a very huge power imbalance that exists between the people calling for change, who sometimes are victims, and the people who are being asked to change. There's normally a very great power imbalance between the two because one group is disenfranchised and the other group is doing the oppressing and has all the social power and all the social capital and all the resources. So you see, with that dynamic, tell me what kind of peaceful dialogue you're going to have. Though I do agree, yes, you should give people the space to grow and become better. For example, Shaffie Weru, he was interviewed last Friday on The Trend and he seemed to show some sense. There was a clear difference between the Shaffie Weru who spoke that day on radio and the Shaffie Weru who was on The Trend that Friday. So to some extent, I do agree that, yeah, you do need to give people the space and chance and grace to grow and change and become better. But this cannot be applied to every case because sometimes you have to fight tooth and nail for things to actually change when you bear in mind the factors that I mentioned earlier when it comes to the power imbalance and the difference, the huge power imbalance and power dynamics between the marginalized and the people who are offending or oppressing the marginalized groups. So, yeah, it's good to keep that in mind. And I also think that Kenyans should also learn to stand their ground if they're going to get anything done. Conversations surrounding the offense should also be considered because they tend to deviate to irrelevant issues. For example, the Shaffie Weru incident resulted in a social media gender war, especially on Twitter. I remember very well for nearly a week or so. There was a heavy gender war, and sometimes these conversations are reductive, and that's the problem when it comes to this whole cancel culture situation, that there are always those people who will deviate the topic or the conversation into something very irrelevant, very useless, and nothing gets solved. We don't actually get tangible solutions to the problem at hand. Na hapo haisaidi mtu. So, conversations should stick to the offense and how can we move forward. Yeah, hii maneno ya kudeviate into us sijui nini, it's so unnecessary and so regressive, and no one really gets help. And the conversation shouldn't just be about when and how public figures should lose their status and livelihoods. It should also include establishing new ethical and social norms and figuring out how to collectively and responsibly respond when those norms are violated. But the salient question now becomes, are Kenyans ready for all of that? With that being said, thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode and let's get real and raw right here on the Rawpod with me, Renee Were.